Hey everyone, welcome to the Anderson Bros Outdoors. I'm Jake, and today we're going to do another ESC testing video on the DYS 35 amp, so stay tuned. Hey everyone, welcome back. As I said, my name is Jake, and today we're doing a ESC testing video on the DYS AM32 35 amp ESC. Now it is a drone ESC. However, it does have the AM32-bit open software on it. It's open source, if you will, and we're going to do some testing on it. I'm actually running this in one of my trucks today, and I'm also running a 70 amp version of it in another truck. I've had no issues with the performance of this ESC to date. However, I have burned one up and almost burned a truck down historically, but we'll talk about that in the review after we go over the ESC itself. So with that being said, let's jump into the footage and then we're going to talk about what we like and don't like about it. As always, with these videos, we're not electrical engineers, so we're not going to cover the details on how all of this works, thermodynamics, energy, things of that nature, because we're not experts in that. And if you are, feel free to drop a comment below and let us know why the test resulted in the outcome. The outcomes are really just for the community to see what they can get away with in terms of which ESC is the best or potentially the best. And we're also going to change motors at some point eventually. So right now we're operating the ESC on a 1450 kV motor. We have 1800 kV motors and a 2550 kV motor to test in the future. Let's jump into the footage. So this is a 3 to 6S ESC. We are doing 3 and 4S only. Diving into it, you can see we do have sine mode at 50 RPM, so we can go very, very slow. However, we're going to bypass sine mode for the testing purposes because sine mode is not available on all ESCs, and it does actually consume more power than regular mode, meaning that it draws more amps and watts. Now, starting off, you can see that I've had to start the timer, readjust the scale, things of that nature. The ambient temperature right now is around 76 degrees, and just in the initial run that we're doing, we're already up to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a pretty significant increase in the 50 or so seconds that we've been running this test. At the 1 minute mark, we'll bump it up to the next notch, and it should go from around 380 or so RPM to probably around 1200-ish. So it is 1150-ish RPM. And you can see we do now have a load on the scale. So it is doing roughly 1 ounce, just under 1 ounce of pressure. We're doing right at 1 1/4 amp draw and 15 watts. The temperature is steadily increasing, not really exponentially, but it is increasing nonetheless. And we're at roughly 95 degrees, and we are 1.5 minutes into the test. As you can see, it's really strange. We are actually increasing in RPM with not actually doing anything to touch the controller, so I'm not sure what the deal is with that. We are increasing pressure on the scale, and we're also increasing the amp draw. So there is a unknown reason why the ESC is actually increasing, which could be a problem if you're running 4 of these. For a drone, it's not really an issue for a crawler. Now we are up to the 2 minute mark. We did increase the RPM to right under 2000 RPM, and we're also increasing significantly the temperature. So we're at roughly 120 degrees at this point, and we're at right around the 5 amp draw with 64 watts. We're going to go ahead and shut this test off because we are exponentially increasing the temperature, and we're already at 150 degrees. So we're going to stop the test. Moving into the 3S test, we've already started the test. It is about 15 seconds into it. We're at roughly 680 RPM, and the ambient temperature for this test is 96 degrees. Now we are going to probably stop this test earlier because of the ambient temperature being higher than 76, and we are already up over 100 degrees. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that the test will be stopped early. It's just the ambient temperature is a lot higher. This is also a good indication for all of you ladies and gentlemen that are on the east or west coast, or even in the Midwest where you're at high temperatures in the summer, that the ESC temperature without a heat sink or a fan will rise very quickly and cause potential problems. There's nothing really out of the ordinary here. We are increasing the RPM from step 1 to step 2. The amp draw is relatively low, the watt draw is relatively low. We do have 35 amps that were rated to push the ESC through, so worst case scenario, when it's colder, we could probably get more output from them. Adding a heatsink at a fan, or even just a fan, would probably increase the runtime and decrease the temperature. As you can see, we're already at just under 2 minutes, and we're at like 150 degrees. So we're likely going to turn the test off after we bump it up to pull 4.5 amps and 72 watts. That third bump will send it over the edge and put us at the 180 degree mark, and so we go ahead and stop the test. So let's talk about a review. Now on this ESC, it's not like the Rhino ESC that we tested, or even the Castle ESC we tested. It did perform worse in terms of time that it could withstand the dyno. With all of the other videos, as I said, the dyno itself is really just a tool to see across all ESCs the same type of load on each combination. The outcome is going to be based upon the ambient temperature, which will allow us to either run the ESC longer or it won't. In this case, we couldn't run it very long because the ambient temperature was too high. Now, not only was the ambient temperature too high, but the ESC doesn't have a heat sink on it. It's just a little tiny aluminum plate, if you will. There's no fins on it, and there's no fan. So with the Rhino and the Castle, they had really big heat sinks, and it allowed us to run that 5-minute period before we thermaled out. For this specific ESC, I do run it with a fan, so if you go onto the website in the link below, you can see that we have created a fan mount for it. It is, I believe, a 30mm fan. It does add additional drain to the battery, but in my mind it's worth it, because if you're comping on a 90+ degree day, or really even 70+ degree day with 4S, you're going to get the ESC and motor really hot. And so adding a 10 to 20 gram fan is a no-brainer in my mind. Some things that I really like about the ESC does have sine mode, so it does do a really slow crawl. It does have a very small footprint, so it's very light. On one of my trucks, I actually have it sitting in front of the motor, so it is more LCG than typically where you would have it on the slider or above the frame rails. Some of the other things that I like are it's quiet. It makes virtually no noise. It does make some, but there isn't a screeching sound. Typically, you're not going to have a high load on your truck like the Dyno puts on there unless your truck weighs a lot, and by a lot I mean more than like 8 pounds. So if you do have a comp truck or even a trail truck that weighs a significant amount, you will probably burn this ESC up. It's not just this ESC though. I've seen other people burn other motors and ESC combinations up as well from having heavy trucks. The other thing you'll want to keep in mind is the gearing. So if the gearing is off, you're going to burn up the ESC and the motor potentially either way, regardless of if you have a fan or not, because the fan's not going to be able to keep up if you have a 4,000 kV motor you're trying to crawl with. Some other benefits to it are it's like a $30 ESC, so you can buy this ESC and a motor combination for less than $50 and have a very good comp ESC and motor setup. That doesn't take into account the fan or the fan mount, because I would highly recommend running them. And if you're doing that, you're likely using 4S and you're using a small battery. This is where I basically almost burned up one of my trucks, is because I was running this ESC on 4S with a 1500 lipo. It wasn't even a hot day. It was a relatively cool day. I think it was in the 60s, maybe 70s. There was some moisture outside, and I was trying to climb a steep incline that had like I said, a lot of moisture on the rock, so there was a lot of wheel spin, and I was using a lot of throttle to get the truck to burn off any dirt or heat up the tires, whatever you want to call it, to get up this rock. I spent probably a minute to 2 minutes doing that, and the truck started to cog really bad and stop. Well, instead of stopping like I should have, I tried to keep pressing the throttle, and when I did that, well, the truck combusted. I'm not sure exactly what happened there. I did a video on that. I think what ended up happening is it got so hot that either the power connections or the motor connections desoldered, causing a lot of stress on the ESC, or potentially arcing positive and negative, causing a fire to break out. I think there are a lot of positives with the ESC, and some of the negatives are you will need a fan. It is a 35 amp ESC, so if you do plan on putting a lot of weight to it, you are going to utilize potentially 35 amps. The temperature and the amperage cutoffs don't work. A big potential negative. If your truck is over the, I would say, 8-pound mark, you don't want to use it because of the fact that it's only 35 amps and you'll need a fan, absolutely. And then on 4S, the ESC is going to get really hot really fast. So that's kind of a common theme amongst all ESCs. It's not just this one specifically. Outside of that, like I said, it has been a good ESC, and I'm very happy with its performance. On my comp truck, and really kind of trail truck, the all-purpose truck that I use it on, I have it connected to a 2000 kV motor, and I've not had any issues. Granted, it does have a fan connected to it, so I am pushing it pretty hard, but I also am cooling it down, and I've never seen the temperature, even on a 100-degree day, go over 10 degrees over ambient. So the fan does wonders in not only cooling the ESC, but moving the air under the body. There's really no other pros or cons with the ESC. It is a cheap, effective ESC. One other thing that you need to know is that it doesn't come with a programmer. You will have to buy a programmer separately or use a programmer from another AM32 ESC, such as the Rhino, to be able to program it, and you will want to change the motor kV because it defaults to 1800, I believe. I'm not sure on that. So that is all I've got for this ESC. I hope that it was of some value for someone out there. We appreciate you making it this far. If you have, feel free to drop us a like. Huge shout out to the people coming up next, and we hope you have a great day.